Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of Hypermode Live. My name is Will, and today we are joined by Dan, also from the Hypermode team. Hey Dan.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Pleasure to be here.
Great. I'm curious. I see some folks in the chat. Hello from Seattle. Great to see you again, Rob. Thanks for joining. I'm curious of the folks joining today. How many folks caught the stream that we did last week with Kevin on Hypermode Agents, and how many folks are new, or maybe how many folks have tried Hypermode Agents? So let us know in the chat if you've tried building an agent with Hypermode yet, and we can kind of guide what we take a look at today. But yeah, the plan for today is to take a deeper dive at Hypermode Agents and take a look at how we can build AI agents with Hypermode that are able to kind of act on our behalf. I like to think of these as my agent interns that are connecting to different services and taking actions on my behalf, and I can kind of train them, and we'll see how all of this works. So
Interns with superpowers, right, Will?
that's true. I was trying to think back to like when I was an intern, and if that's a fair comparison of like saying that a hypermode agent is as skilled as an intern. And I think like some of the we'll take a look at some of the concepts with how we define tasks and like natural language instructions that I think make a lot of sense when we're talking about agents as interns, because I think the idea is interns typically are a bit guided in sort of the tasks you're giving them. But the biggest difference, I think, yeah, is the superpowers that Dan's talking about, which is like giving your agents connections to services on your behalf. So being able to interact with your GitHub, connected to your CRM, make sense of all this data, that sort of thing.
Mm. Yep.
So I see some folks in the chat saying that, yeah, we're new to Hypermode Agents. That's cool. Not quite yet. Catching up. Cool. Sounds good. Well, let's jump into it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here.
Let us know in the chat as well if you've already been building anything with AI agents. We'd love to hear, what you've been hacking away at, and if we can remake that using Hypermode agents.
Totally. Yeah, I'd love for these streams to be as interactive as possible, and part of it too is trying to understand what folks are wanting to build other than a coffee fetching agent.
I don't know if we have like a Starbucks or anything connection so far, but it might be a good one to add. Or a coffee machine connection.
That's true. Cool. So let me drop the link to this blog post that I'm showing in the chat here. Oh, I lost my screen. Let's share that again. I don't know what happened there. There we go. Okay, so the blog post that I'm showing here was our announcement post where we opened up Hypermode Agents in beta. So Hypermode Agents is currently in public beta. That means anyone can sign up for it, and we'll show what the sign up flow looks like now, and how folks can create agents. And then also for anyone joining the stream today, we're going to give away 1 month free of access to Hypermode Pro, which allows you to add from over 2,000 different connections to connect agents to services to act on your behalf, and create as many sort of domain specific agents as you're wanting to. So some of the concepts of Hypermode agents, I'd say one is the basic idea here is what we've observed at Hypermode over the last couple years of building AI tooling, is that there's kind of this disconnect when you have the domain expert who's wanting to build some AI app and put that into production, who knows the workflow, they know what they're trying to implement, and they sort of go to the AI engineer or the ML engineering team, and there's a bit of a disconnect in trying to build that AI app, that agentic flow, uh, things that get kind of lost in communication. And so the whole idea with Hypermode agents is, can we enable those domain experts to describe the agent they want to create with natural language, and combining that with giving lots and lots of options for connections. So these are essentially MCP servers, which allow our agents to connect to tools that connect to different services, to then allow the agents, without really writing any code, without having to be an engineer yourself, can you then create these domain specific agents that can act on your behalf with these services. And so that's what Hypermode Agents is all about. So there's this threads interface that allows us to interact with our agent in natural language, add these connections, these sorts of things. And of course, under the hood, this is running on our Modus open source agent framework, using our model routing service, which for folks that have been following along, um, these are different pieces that we've released. So we have the sort of scalability of like the Hypermode platform and the Modus framework powering this natural language experience, which is what we're going to take a look at today.
Think that that backing, of our modus framework is really important because you described that, these experts in the domain that they're building apps and then passing them off to other engineers, but they might be building those apps in kind of any language. They might have AI generated all the code. It might be a little bit scrappy, so that kind of handoff flow is going to be a little bit messy. But with Hypermode, we have a dedicated open source platform that's powering these agents under the hood. That gives you the guardrails and the scaffolding to actually build and hand off an app to engineers to build that into something that scales.
Totally. Cool. Well, I pasted a link to the docs here, but let's go ahead and sign in. So folks can follow along here. If you like, we're gonna show how to upgrade to Hypermode Pro, for free for everyone who joins today. So we're gonna have a secret code to unlock that. So if you want to follow along, you can definitely do that. So if you go to hypermode.com/login, you'll be prompted to create a workspace. I've already done that. So Hypermode live streams is the name of my workspace here. And then you will see this threads experience. So threads, this is the way that we interact with our agents. And by default, when you sign in and create a free tier account in Hypermode, you have access to a single agent, the Sidekick agent. And Sidekick, if we take a look at the pieces here that make up an agent, we'll talk about some of the abstractions here. We have a description. I keep losing my screen for some reason. Let's add that in again. This one. There we go. So we have like the name and description of our agent, but then we have the instructions. So if we look at the structure of this instruction, this is, you can think of like a system prompt if you're familiar with some of these concepts. And so the structure of the system prompt has an identity, some context, and instructions. So this is the natural language description for kind of the background and role that we want our agent to have. We need a model to sort of orchestrate our agent. The Sidekick runs on GPT-4.1. When we create our own agents, we have a whole host of models we can choose as well. And then another important piece here is connections. And so these connections, these are the way that we allow our agent to interact with its environment, and that's done on our behalf. And by default, the Sidekick agent, which is our helpful personal executive assistant, has access to just one connection, which is Google Calendar, which I've already connected here. So if you go through the OAuth flow to connect Google Calendar, then the Sidekick agent is going to be able to help us manage our schedule and sort of work with our calendar, prepare for meetings, update meetings, and this sort of thing. The
If you
way
look
that we
at the
interact.
if you
Go
think
ahead there.
about interns, you're kind of describing it's like the inverse of a job spec or an application. Like you'd have a job specification and then interns would apply with their CV. But with this description, you've kind of got it all in one. You're kind of describing the job that this agent is going to do and then describing its capabilities and its skills or its connections, so to speak.
Yeah, in some way, this is like the resume, or I don't know, the skill set of the agent for sure.
That's cool. I've never thought about it as the resume, but it's pretty cool.
And we'll talk a bit more about how we can construct these instructions with the background and role. We don't necessarily, as we create a new agent, have to write this by hand. We'll actually see how we can use an agent to create our agents in a minute, which is a fun concept. So in this Threads UI, so this is the way that we chat with our agent. We'll start that in a minute. One more thing I want to talk about before we start using Sidekick is this idea of tasks. So you can see these little like pills here where I can prepare a daily agenda, research person, suggest ways to work with Sidekick. This task, these are sort of like trained skills that we can give our agent. And so when I click that task to start the task, there's essentially a trained skill that runs that we've given to our agent. We'll see how to create these in a moment, but we can see here, like now the agent is suggesting ways that I can work with Sidekick. Cool. So those are the basic concepts. Let's see how this works in practice. So I've connected my calendar, and so one thing I could do is say something like, "Who am I meeting with this week?" And we'll see here that the agent was thinking, is coming up with a plan, and then it is invoking tools. And so it's calling the Google Calendar list event tools. And these are tools that are exposed through MCP. So that's how our connections for the agent are powered through MCP servers. This is using the Google Calendar MCP server, which I've authorized to connect to my calendar to fetch events for the remainder of the week. And then we can see there's a JSON response. And I have a lot of meetings in here, but I specifically, a lot of these are like reminders, like put out the trash and some trip that I have coming up or the hotel I'm staying at. And so specifically though, I asked like, who am I meeting with? And so the people that I'm meeting with, those meetings have been extracted here. So I'm meeting with Kevin, who's the CEO at Hypermode, and then I have a job interview at OpenAI. I probably shouldn't have shared that. Hopefully, my friends at Hypermode don't mind.
Screen.
I did lose my screen again.
Guess you shouldn't be sharing the calendar invite anyway, Will. So it's good it went.
Yeah, that's weird. I don't know what's going on with the screen there, but well, that's fine. We'll just keep adding it back. No big deal. Okay, cool. So that's kind of the way that the agent is able to, figure out which tools to call. It's able to, make sense of the data that comes back and say, hey, here's some meetings with people that you have. Let's say, help me prepare for these meetings. So Sidekick has access to other tools as well, like web search to be able to, it knows, okay, I'm meeting with Kevin Van Gundy, I'm meeting with, Sam Altman for this job interview. Here's some suggestions for how you can prepare for that based on background of who these people are, and these sorts of things. And so it comes up with this plan. Start by gathering background information. Yes. Let's start with background information. So now we're going to use the research tool, web search tool, to find information about these folks that are going to help me prepare for my meetings.
I find this
And we
web
can,
search tool so cool, like you can just find kind of any piece of information about pretty much any person who's publicly visible. Super handy to do some research and maybe even just give it a try on yourself and see what it knows about yourself. It's a fun exercise.
so I found Kevin recently spoke at ODSC conference, so it's going to leverage his speaker profile for that. Similar for Sam Altman. Cool. Okay, great. So it's done the research, and let's prepare talking points for each meeting. And let's say I want to focus on highlighting my value, maybe to these companies.
We
Right. I
had a
want to.
question about the events being in the calendar already, so it might be worth if you can show they are in there. That's where they're being pulled from via the tool call. Um, Will's prepared some events in his calendar already to pull from this.
Exactly. Yeah. So the idea here is that I've connected my Google Calendar. I will say this is not my actual work calendar. This is a personal calendar that have some fake events. I do not actually have a job interview at OpenAI. I just have that as kind of an event that I've saved on my calendar. And if we look at the tool call, so I asked who am I meeting with this week? And the tool that was called was list events, and the parameters for that. So the model, our agent chose which tool to call. So there are many tools for Google Calendar, right? There's list events, search events, update event, create an event, add details to the event, these sorts of things. So the model, the agent is choosing which tool or maybe even multiple tools to call to be able to resolve my query. And then of all the data that comes back, it's then seeing oh, well, some of these meetings are reminders, like my put out trash reminder, you're not meeting with anyone. So that doesn't make sense. So it's filtering out this JSON response of all the events for through the end of the week. And figuring out oh, these are the ones where you're actually meeting with people. And then we're sort of diving into using other tools like web search and these sorts of things. Yeah, cool. Good question. And I see another question here. So a tool needs an MCP server for the agent to connect to. Is that correct? Yeah. So so we showed this idea of the Google Calendar connection, and that connection where we're giving the agent the ability to interact with Google Calendar on our behalf is using an MCP server. And so yes, exactly. That's how the tools, the access to these different services are exposed to the agent through MCP. And we'll see in a minute how we can use other MCP connections when we create our own agent. This is just sort of one sort of default agent that we get when
Yeah.
working with agents.
I wouldn't even say it's necessarily like a limiting thing either that you need an MCP server to do these connections because the state of the ecosystem, as you'll see, we lost your screen again. Well, the state of the ecosystem, people are moving very fast. There's there's providers that aggregate other MCP connections as well. So you'll find that in the pro tier that will show you afterwards that there's 2,000 plus connections. So you can connect to a lot of different services, and that list is always growing as well. And eventually you'll be able to add your own MCP servers and have your own custom logic in there as well.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like it's not just through an MCP server that we're able to add tools to Hypermode agents. So I mentioned at the beginning that we're using the open source Modus agent framework, and Modus has the ability for you to define tools basically as mappings of functions. You can add sort of the description for the function and the description for the parameters to the function and make those tools available to the model, to the agent, to use in sort of choosing how to resolve a query from a user. And that doesn't need MCP. So MCP allows us, I think, to access thousands of these existing MCP servers that services have built, or allows us to connect through those. So that's a huge advantage. But yeah, that's a good point. Question: if we've showed how to get pro? Not yet. We're going to show that in a minute. So just a second, we'll show how to upgrade to Hypermode Pro tier, which will allow us to add other connections other than just Google Calendar and create new agents. We're going to walk through creating some new agents. Also, another question about how we're doing agent orchestration here. Is the agent customizable? Yeah, so we're using the Modus agent framework, which, let me pull up the docs here. I'll drop a link to the docs for Modus. So Modus is an open source agent framework that we build and maintain at Hypermode that has abstractions for working with data models, creating agents, this sort of thing. And that's what the Hypermode agents and the threads experience, that's what is backing that under the hood. Cool. So let me show just a couple more things, and then we'll switch over to upgrading to Pro tier and creating new agents. So I next kind of want to maybe save these talking points in the meeting description now that we've generated them with the web search tool. So we'll say, let's add these talking points to the meeting descriptions. And so now if this works, the agent should know that, okay, we're going to use a update event tool, and we're going to update in my calendar these talking points. Cool. So those have been updated. So if I check my calendar now, I'll have my talking points saved, which is pretty neat. Cool.
It's been able to figure out the MCP server is essentially like a API with a schema that the large language model can understand. So it's been able to look at that API schema and cross-reference it with the conversation, and figure out, okay, let's update the event. There's a function to call, a tool to call called update event, which is really powerful.
Totally. Cool. So yeah, thanks for the questions, folks. Feel free to keep asking. What I want to show now is, let's unlock Hypermode Pro tier, and folks can follow along. We'll give a code for this that will give you a free month of Pro tier, and then we'll show how to create a new agent. There are a couple of interesting ways to create an agent, including an agent to create your agent, and then we'll look at some other connections beyond Google Calendar that we can add. So anyone can go through the Schedule Pro onboarding, because Hypermode Agents is still in beta. We're really interested in collecting feedback and chatting with folks kind of individually, trying to set expectations, trying to understand what folks are building, that sort of thing. So one way is to go through the Schedule Pro onboarding. It's like a 15-minute call just to kind of walk through different concepts. But because we're going through this now, you can consider this sort of everyone's onboarding session for the live stream. And so we're going to go sort of through a secret way to upgrade everyone to pro tier. And so there's a secret URL, which I'll paste in the chat in a second, hypermode.com/fast track, I think it is. Drop that in the chat. And so if you go to that URL, if you're not signed in, you'll be prompted to sign in and create an organization. And then you'll see this form for entering an access code. And the access code for everyone on the live stream today is hype-live-build, I think it is. Yes. So I'll drop that in the chat as well. So you can use that code to upgrade. This gives free 1 month to Hypermode Pro. And the thing you'll notice initially is that in addition to Sidekick, there's a new agent called Hypermode Concierge, which is an agent to build agents, which is kind of a fun concept. So that's one way to create a new agent. Cool. But with that, I think we'll switch over to Dan, who's going to walk us through creating new agents.
Yeah, let's do it. There was a question about the costing. So it's worth thinking about when you're deploying an agent, you're almost deploying an independent piece of software that can act over time and time scales. So depending on the usage and how many times you call the model, is going to factor into the price of your agent. Well, I don't know if you have any more to shine onto that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say like right now while we're in beta, I think we're really interested in understanding like what folks want to build, and really understanding feedback. Are there other connections that folks are looking for? So I think while we're in beta, there's no charge while you're upgraded to free tier or to the pro tier.
Cool. And obviously, you can use the code for the month to hack away and get familiar with it. So I have a workspace here. I've already applied the code, so I have access to Concierge and all of the connections that involve. I thought I would go through a couple of agents, reaching out to external services that many of you may use, and to demonstrate some of the use cases here. So one of the services that I use every single day that you can connect with Hypermode is Spotify. And so I thought let's make something with the calendar. Let's maybe add like a week's worth of meditation sessions into the calendar, and then we can put a specific track from Spotify into the description of each of those invites. So when it comes around to doing meditation, you just click the invite, and you've got the track there ready to play. So as Will mentioned, Concierge is an agent to help you build agents. So I have to give some ideas and some context into this chat box. We have a bunch of examples on our documentation that you can basically copy and paste in, which is really handy. But let's give this some context. So let's say that you are a agent to schedule. Oh,
Could you zoom in maybe just a little bit, Dan?
yeah,
Thank you.
there we go. You're an agent to schedule meditation. Oh, that, um, in the calendar. So from Sidekick, we already know that we have access to Google Calendar. But for each event, let's add a Spotify meditation track. Spelling is not my strong point, so let's just fix these up. So I don't search for songs. Let's connect to the calendar and Spotify. What it does. And so this is going to search some of the connections that Hypermode has available to it, and then also think about bringing this into some form of task. So it searched the connections and it's found, okay, it has access to Google Calendar and it also has access to Spotify. And then it's prompting us if we want to build this for our organization or just for personal use. So let's just build this for personal use. Okay. It's always going to ask us for a cool name, and it has really good generation for inspirational names. So we have Zenify or Calmcaster. Which one do you think will?
I like the alliteration that it comes up with. So I always look for things like Columncaster or
Yeah,
what I had a snippet. Well, I was doing, yeah, some like code analysis thing, and it had something very clever like snippet snipe, something like that. So I'm a
it's
sucker for those alliteration names.
it's cool because these agents are eventually going to become part of your team and your team's workflows. So giving them something meaningful name, eventually you'll be bringing up the Calmcaster name in your team meetings, and it's going to become a lot more personable, which is really cool. So let's say Calmcaster looks good. Let's deploy this. Create the agent. And now you'll see in the agents sidebar on the left that we have Calmcaster. So we can go over to that and we have some information. So it's already figured out that we have a connection to Google Calendar and Spotify. But if you do want to add more connections, then we have a list of a few thousand ever growing in here that you can connect to. And it's also given us just some information, which is the prompt that has been generated by the concierge agent. Um, and now what we can do is we can start to interact with this agent. So maybe for the next week, every single day I want to add a meditation session in, and I want to pick a random track from a meditation playlist. If I go to Spotify, and here's one that I like called Mindful Meditation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the link to this playlist, and let's ask it if it can figure out the songs. So can you get the songs in this playlist? Well, that's thinking you can upload your own avatar and make it more personable, or you can also get it to generate a random avatar for you, which is really cool. So the agent is figuring out, okay, it's got a Spotify connection, and in that Spotify connection we have a bunch of tools, and one of them is get playlist items. But right now it's reaching out to Spotify, and it's intelligently extracted the ID from the link that I get it. So if you're a developer, you can probably see that there's an ID in there. Oh, what did we get? Let's try that again. See what happened. We can try again. Give it just the ID.
I was playing around with a Spotify agent last week. I'm going to on this trip to Miami in a couple days for this AI agent World Fair event, and I've never been to Miami before, and I created an agent to suggest and create a playlist for me to kind of feature Miami songs, that the culture of Miami, and get me a little bit excited for my trip. And it created a playlist which was fun. It was a lot of Pitbull in it, which he's Mr.
Nice.
305, like your
I
your
didn't think he was that
stereotypical.
kind, Will, sitting on the plane, jamming out to Pitbull.
Well, like when you're going on a trip somewhere, you want to experience like music, hyping that area, and I think
Yeah.
Pitbull probably is one of the most I don't know, stereotypical for when you think about like Miami music. But no, there's a lot of other like cool like Cuban inspired stuff, some Bad Bunny, this sort of thing. Actually, I'll find this and I'll share the link to the playlist in the chat. Folks can
Yeah, we
can
can
see
add
what I came
Pitbull
up
to
with.
the meditation playlist.
Doesn't seem very meditative to me, but
Yeah. You can see here that it had a little bit of trouble, and that's okay. Sometimes things you just need to prompt it again and get it on its direction. This is always going to get better over time as well as more people use it, and as our team grows, and as we integrate more features. But you can see that it pulled the 10 first tracks from that playlist from the Spotify API. So now we know that we have a connection to Spotify, and Tabor already showed us how to connect to Google Calendar. And I've already connected in the background to Google Calendar. So now let's get it to for the next week. Let's add an event into my calendar. 9 a.m. PT for 30 minutes with the with random song in the description. Random song, what's that from this list?
we had a question here asking, is the agent connecting to the Spotify MCP? And yeah, that's exactly what's going on. So the connections that we're showing, we mentioned there's over like 2,000 connections that you can authorize on your behalf to give your agent access to tools to interact with different services. And here we're using the Spotify MCP server that Dan already went through the auth flow for that. And so it's connecting to Spotify, like authorized, like on his behalf. That's one I think important concept with agents, and the way we treat agents at Hypermode is that they're always acting on your behalf. So if you authorize an agent to your GitHub, it's acting on your behalf, that sort of thing. And so the two MCP server connections that Dan is using here is Google Calendar and Spotify.
Do you know of any other music platforms that we have access to? I'm trying to think if is there iTunes, maybe. Is that still a thing, iTunes?
I
Not sure
think
if
it's
we have.
Apple Music now. I don't know if that has an API though.
Maybe it's just Spotify that we have connected to. Music Brains as well, if anybody uses that. Okay, cool. So you'll see that I asked the agent to create a week's worth of meditation and put the random song in the description. So it's gone ahead and picked a random song for the next week. So if I actually go to my calendar, to calendar today, you'll see that for every morning for the next week, we have a entry. And then in the description of that entry, we have a track. And I wonder just if we can have it linked to Spotify instead of um, just calling out the track name. So let me just edit that again. This will just show if we can edit those events that we've created. So let's say, could you
And while Dan's going through that step, one thing that I think is interesting here is like there's a lot of state and context being maintained in each one of these threads in each one of these conversations. And an important concept in Modus, like the agent framework that we're using under the hood that you can build your own agents on top of. It's using this concept that every agent has state, and in that case, the state that we're maintaining is the conversation history, and there's also the result of the tool call information. So like when with each one of those tool calls that comes back, when it's like fetch my calendar events or get track like the songs, there's more information there than just like the title of the song. There's the URL of the song, the ID of the song, and so all of that information is being maintained kind of as state, as context of this conversation history for your agents in the background. And I think the kind of tips and tricks sort of things that you learn is some of these MCP servers are better than others at working with um, say like the name of a Slack channel versus the ID of a Slack channel and that sort of thing. And so one thing that we've learned is a lot of these MCP servers have been, I think, created as wrappers over APIs that already existed, and so we're going through and improving some of these MCP servers because the way that you interact with an API is a bit different than how an agent wants to interact with an MCP server, right? Especially that example of an ID versus a name is a common one, and so one of the tips we've learned is if the MCP server isn't so great at, say, like, and Slack is a good example of this, isn't so great at searching for or knowing the name of a Slack channel. Sometimes you have to ask it for the ID and then refer to that Slack channel by ID going forward. So there's some limitations to the way that agents are able to handle these sorts of things. And I think while we're in beta, these are the developer experience things that we're sort of hardening and trying to improve. So that's why I think feedback from folks is really important at this stage.
I think that's a really good thing to bring up. I think, being as specific as possible when it comes to the context of your agent, and also when you're giving it things to retrieve. Instead of being broad and say, find me all of X, can instead find me, this specific thing. And you'll find that a lot of the MCP servers will have like a get by ID function that you can call. Um, Looks like we're having a little bit of trouble. It looks like it received the tracks, but it's having a little bit of problem constructing the link. And I think that's because the link is not actually returned in the JSON. Instead, it's kind of getting the get track information, but it may not have returned its ID. Instead, it's returned some description about the track. And so you can kind of prompt this by giving it what a Spotify track link looks like, and then ask it again, okay, this is what a link looks like. Can you fetch those tracks again? And then construct a link, as it may not understand. Maybe Spotify changes its link structure every now and then. So you have to kind of prompt it with some of these things. And this kind of shows a little bit of a limitation of some of the MCP servers that we connected to. But as Will mentioned, as over time we're going to be coming out of beta, and so are all these other tools as well. So um, we can continue prompting this, but I thought it'd be maybe good to kind of show another example. So I'll park
Be-
this one. Go ahead, Will.
Before we move on to the next one, Raphael has a good suggestion here, which is, we could, going forward, we could edit that agent prompt. So the instruction for the agent that you showed earlier that was generated by the concierge agent, like we can edit this to maybe instruct it to always use a Spotify URL when we're updating calendar description, that sort of thing. So that might be another way to try to approach that. Just a pointer that those it's an iterative process, I think, to try to figure out, the best way to interact with your agent, and always sort of training the agents going forward.
Yeah. And you can see here, like it says, Spotify's API works best with exact tracked IDs or precise titles. So I think if you're working mostly with long lists of stuff, then it may not allow you to do that. And you could be reaching the limitations and performance and security concerns around that API as well. So as specific as possible is the best way to proceed. Um, Thought I would do another fun one as well. Do we have time, Will? How are we doing for time?
Yeah, we've got about 10 more minutes.
Cool. Okay, I thought I'd do a fun one. So we reached out to Spotify. But as I mentioned, there's a couple thousand different connections, and I thought fun one to do would be the Coin Market Cap API. So I thought maybe we can like connect to Google Sheets. We can pull some of the coin market cap stats. We can put them into Sheets, and maybe we can give like we can figure out a description of why that price action is. Um, so let's configure it. So you are a crypto price list, and your goal is to take the historic um, a date range, print into a Google Sheet, and then attach a based on the local news, based on the news. So here we're kind of asking it, okay, reach out to uh, CoinMarketCap, and I'll be as specific as possible as well. Your crypto using. So you're going to reach out to CoinMarketCap, and your goal is to take specific historic data. So we can just give it like the last week of price action. It's going to take every single one of those rows and print it to Google Sheet, and then attach a summary of why that price action might be. So maybe like over the last couple of days, there's been a lot of geopolitical tension. So we should see maybe like a dip in that price, and then a summary of that price that says, war broke out or something like that. Let's give it a go.
And so just to clarify, Coin Marketplace, or was it Coin Cap?
Coin
This
market
is
cap. Yeah.
Coin Market Cap. This is like a crypto sort of pricing across different exchanges. Is that the idea? Or different coins across different exchanges, that sort of thing?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like a crypto price aggregator among many different exchanges.
Cool.
Okay. So it says, let's get building. First, does your agent need to represent a specific company, or no, we can just use it for personal use. And so what's going to be really interesting about this is, we're not just going to be pulling in the price data, because you could just go to the website for that, but we want it to bring in the price data, but also search the web, and search the news articles that are out there, and give us an assumption of why that price action might be the way that it is.
And I think that's a good example of where we can get a lot of value from these agents, is when we're adding like tools from different services. So either multiple connections, or sort of like chaining together tool calls across services. The way I like to think of, one of the ways we can find value from these agents is like if it's doing something that is saving me time. So something, that I do repeatedly, and maybe that's like the example of going to one service and then searching another to try to explain what's going on. I think that's a couple of good examples of like if we're thinking of what kind of agent should I build, like how do I find value in these agents? It's one of like think of where can I chain together multiple of these services, and what's something that I'm doing repeatedly that I can have an agent do to save me time.
at mercy of our demo gods here, but I feel like it's going to come through. I think it might be doing something in the background, and I've just refreshed it a couple of times. Probably not the best thing to do.
Mhm. Coin sleuth is the
Coin
name that we
sleuth.
came up with.
Yeah, I like it.
See, I would have I'm such a sucker for the alliteration. I would have gone for the chart chaser or the price pulse, like something
Price
something that
pulse.
has
It
that.
likes a good pulse. I've noticed that it makes a lot of pulses. We might have to start this one again. Maybe we've just experienced a little bug. Let's start again. Mm, Give it another refresh. Seems like it wants to do something.
I think some folks following along there, seeing a couple errors too, so we may have to
Let's start again.
check the logs and see what's going on there. Couple of questions while you're going through that, Dan, that we can take here. One is Dante is asking, in the workspace you can invite team members. If they join your workspace, are you sharing agents or connections, or are they isolated? Yeah, so really good question. So um, you can have multiple workspaces, and then each workspace you can invite folks, and the agents are shared. There's also the concept of graphs and apps, which we haven't talked about at all. But a graph is like a hosted dgraph instance. Apps are when you sort of are not going through this threads agent experience, but when you're hosting Modus, like a Modus app, which is the orchestration framework that's running under the hood. That would be the app piece of this. But the agents, the apps, the graphs are shared across folks in your workspace, but the connections are not. So other folks would have to add their own user connections. I think we're considering like user and workspace connections, being able to add connections at different levels and share those across the workspace. I think we're evolving that a bit, but for now, each user would have to add their own connection. So good question on that. Similar question here about storing credentials. Yeah, so one thing we haven't really showed here is how these connections are authorized, because we've already walked through the auth flow. So most of these connections are done via OAuth. So when you go to add a connection, you're typically going through the OAuth flow to authorize that connection on your behalf, and then those tokens are managed behind the scenes. You can manage all of those in the workspace settings. You can see all of the connections and add and drop those connections. And then for the concept of like a vault or something like that, where you want to manage like secrets or something like that. That is built into Modus. So if we sort of eject to code, or we're working with like the code first experience for building these agents, there is the concept of secrets in Modus, and also in the apps, which is like the hosted Modus app running in Hypermode. There is the concept of defining secrets that are then exposed to your Modus app as environment variables.
Cool. I just managed to build the agent. Seems like we might have like a lot of traffic. I was having to refresh quite a few times, but we'll get on top of that. But I just kind of asked it the same as before. I said, for personal use, let's call it Coin Pulse. Let's only focus on the BTC price. And then it's conversational when you're building this agent, because it's an agent to build agents. So it's intelligent enough to say like, hey, do you want me to, where is it? Where's the question here? it's like, hey, do you want me to create a new sheet for each analysis, or would you like me to use an existing sheet? And then if you pick the existing sheet, then it will ask you what's the ID for that sheet. But I just asked it, create a new sheet for each analysis. And here we have coin pulse. Um, let's go to the connection. So Google Sheets has been connected, as I already connected that before. But some connections you'll have to come in here and manually add, because you have to do an OAuth2 flow. So prepared a key earlier for this demo. Mm, so connect, I have the key in my notes. And we'll select Pro. Now we've connected to CoinMarketCap. We have our sheets and CoinMarketCap. So let's ask it for some price action. Let's say get the latest.
And while that's running, let's
Mhm.
answer one more question here from Dante, which is asking, how do we get under the hood? Is there a way to access the code behind the agent to share with an engineering team? Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think what we're showing here is this like natural language, no code experience of building an agent under the hood. We mentioned a few times this is running on top of Modus, the agent framework that we build and maintain, which is an open source agent framework at Hypermode. There is an eject to code feature. This is kind of an alpha, and so we can certainly work with you if you have an existing agent and you want to convert that into a Modus app. This I think we'll be adding soon in the Hypermode Agents threads experience, where you'll be able to take the agent that you've built, the connections, the tools that you've defined, and generate the exact code, the exact Modus app that's running on. Until we have that functionality, you can also start from a code first experience. So there are abstractions in Modus for creating agents, working with models, these sorts of things. So that is certainly an option as well. But the goal is to have that one click eject to code, which will then deploy your agent to a hosted Hypermode app, and then also write the code to a GitHub repo, and then you can kind of update the code in GitHub, and that deploys to Hypermode as a hosted app, or also choose that to run wherever you want.
Yeah, so it looks like we're kind of iterating on this, and that this kind of shows that you do need to be quite iterative with building the agent. So you can see that it's kind of like grab some prices, and it's having a little bit of trouble with some of the dates. So we might have to explicitly prompt it that the dates are in a certain format, so that you can, because it's trying to look into the future for prices. But you can kind of get the gist that we're getting the prices, and it's also gone ahead and made a Google Sheet. But again, it's kind of like come into some error here. So don't be alarmed if you get an error. The goal is not to have the agent work straight away. The goal is to be prompting the agent, giving it, patterns, and telling it not to do this and not to format the date like this, and to get the price in a certain currency. Um, and so it's going to be like a very conversational, iterative process. But I hope just from these two demos, from connecting to Spotify, connecting to CoinMarketCap, connecting to Google Sheets, you can kind of get the idea that you can, connect to all of these services and build something really meaningful.
And that sort of iterative experience that Dan was describing, I think of as like training our agent. Once you sort of are able to have the agent understand, like, right, like this is the format that I want, we can always go through this the sort of series of steps, we can create a task. We didn't talk too much about this task concept, but you can see there's this create task button in the bottom right. And when we do that, we're sort of creating a repeatable skill for our agent based on the thread that we have open. So based on that conversation, we go through a process of generating the instructions for completing that task going forward. And then that's a step that we can then invoke anytime going forward. So our agent then has that task. We can choose to run that on a schedule. We can come into threads and invoke it. So it might be like prepare for my week ahead, like that, that sort of thing. So that this iterative experience isn't sort of lost once you've had that successful sort of interaction with your agent where it's completed something on your behalf. Then the typical workflow is to add that as a task, so that the agent can then learn that skill and we can invoke that going forward.
Right, exactly. You can see this like iterative process. So once you've like finalized the process and it works, it's almost like creating the task, you're committing that into, if you're thinking about it from a code perspective, okay, you're coding, you're writing away, bugs, errors, integration problems. Okay, it's working. I'll commit this, and that's kind of the same thing with a task of like, this is ready. Do this thing over and over again. I know that it works, kind of thing.
Totally cool. Well, we're a bit over time, so maybe we should end it about here. Looks like you're making progress with your integration with Google Sheet there a little bit.
Get in there. Yeah, get in there. But we'll leave this one there.
Cool. One thing I want to show before we drop off is the agent gallery. I'll drop a link to that in the chat here. So Dan showed us a couple of cool examples with different types of agents that we can build, different connections we can use. But really, there's a huge, like, over 2,000 different kinds of connections that we can add. So there are lots of, I think, opportunities for finding value, both for like automating personal uh, sort of personal activities, but also if you think of, I want to analyze maybe my CRM and connect that to Stripe to maybe surface where I want to suggest discounts or upgrades for my customers, or I want to understand event and webinar analysis, like these sorts of things. There are lots of like, I think, really interesting agent workflows that we're sort of discovering folks are interested in. And also there's a whole sort of like code assistant, DevOps assistant area to go down for developers. So what we showed here is kind of like just getting a toe in the water, I think, of what's possible, the types of agents we can build. So check out the agent gallery. There's kind of examples of like the instructions, the connections needed, and some example conversations. So you can use that for inspiration, or actually just sort of like copy and paste those instructions to get started. I think what we want to do too going forward with some of these Hypermode live events is maybe focus them on specific verticals. So like maybe do a session on building agents specifically for marketing and sales. Maybe we'll do another one specific to developers and DevOps flow, like those sorts of things. So that's something to look forward to as well. But it certainly helps, I think, if folks can suggest or like let us know like what are things that you want to build with Hypermode agents going forward. So definitely let us know. I dropped a link to the Discord server. That's a great place to join and connect with the community and folks. So any feedback that folks have is super helpful. And also be sure to look at our Luma page going forward to figure out what events we have. I think we have a next live stream scheduled for July 1st. Maybe we'll do that one focused on, I don't know, sales and marketing workflows. I don't know. We'll figure out exactly what we're going to do going forward. But great. We're over time a little bit. Thanks everyone for joining today. Thanks, Dan, for showing us some cool agent ideas. And
Thanks for joining, everyone. Yeah, I look forward to hearing everybody's ideas in Discord as well, Any kind of business task that you're repeating, over and over again in your daily life. We believe that agents can kind of remove that repetition for you. So really keen to see what people build and reach out on Discord if you've got any questions or you're stuck on anything.
Cool. And we will sign off there. So thanks for joining, everyone. And we will see you next